So that if I was there in that circumstance, you better believe I would have booted that cop off of George Floyd. There were people begging him, begging the police officer to get his knee off of George Floyd's neck because he was begging for his life. He said multiple times he couldn't breathe. And in the span of minutes and minutes and minutes, 10 minutes, he held his knee cold, calculated, knowing exactly what he was doing, creating unwarranted pain and suffering to a man who is pleading for his life. Here's what I will follow up with that in context. You have to understand that police officers across the United States have good intent. Yes, there are bad police officers like the one that was on this man's neck. But I've worked with police officers all over the United States, and I've seen the broad spectrum of those who serve in uniform. First responders, from dispatch, paramedics, fire, EMS, police officers, I've seen them all. I, as a human being, as a leader in special operations, will be the first person to stand up if I see wrongs and try to make them right. I've never been somebody who, and maybe this is my own detriment, I've never been somebody to keep my mouth shut when something needed to be said for something that was wrong. I saw this circumstance and immediately identified it as a cowardice circumstance in the hands of those police officers that dealt with him because they showed no empathy and no respect for human life. But I also didn't look at that circumstance and think that man who's on his neck is a racist, even though he was white and George Floyd was black. Because what I've seen historically happen in these type of circumstances is black leaders who come out of the woodwork, like Al Sharpton, like Jesse Jackson, who advocate, maybe even unwittingly, to violence, saying we have had enough, making it a big deal. But it is a big deal. But I wonder where those men and women are when African-American inner city males are getting gunned down on the streets in the dozens every weekend across the inner cities in America. Baltimore, Chicago, Los Angeles. The list goes on. That's what's heartbreaking, is because there is a double standard. Not to do with race, but to do with incompetence. That people, if you care about people, then you care about people getting killed no matter who they are. Recently, because of this situation with George Floyd, many people have been coming out of the woodwork, inciting riots and violence, burning businesses down. Did you know that last night a young man was gunned down and killed by a pawn shop owner because he was violently protesting and trying to break into that shop? I don't know the circumstances in which, if they prosecuted the male, but a young man died. Is that not as important as any human life, including George Floyd's? Is that what George Floyd would have wanted for his inner city, for his community? I think not, especially when they're burning down their own inner cities and their own businesses that happen to be African-American owned. That really breaks my heart. I saw an encouraging video of a large African-American male standing in front of a business, shoving young African-American males who are trying to get into the business to loot, to steal. Because he said, we're standing here fighting for a cause, and you guys are doing this because you're greedy, because you want to be a criminal, a thug. Well, herein lies the overall problem with our society, is we like to put Band-Aids on axe wounds. We don't like to address at the core how we're going to fix these problems in our country. What are the problems? The loss of fathers in homes, especially in the African-American community. The loss of jobs because of many variables, including COVID-19. The continued propping up of poor incentives and behaviors for facilitating people to stay in poverty and not get outside of their circumstance when they're living in it. Here's more. Here's more. Here's a government handout. Here's a government handout. Encouraging people to stay in their circumstances, no matter how dire that might be. That's not how human behavior works. We need to be incentivized. Our education system is completely and utterly broken. If you look at the statistics of young men and women who are graduating high school in inner cities, it would be astounding. It would hurt you. It should hurt you as an empathetic a human being. So when I see a person who's a police officer acting bad, I don't jump to conclusions. You know why? Because I work for institutions, including the U.S. Army and the CIA. And I saw incompetence at every level, including the tactical level, with the most specialized operators in the world. I've seen bad actors do bad things to good people. Nobody is immune from it. One of the inherent problems is the cultures that we build within those institutions. When I see law enforcement officers doing dumb shit, instead of blaming a race, I blame the person, because I believe that as individuals, we are responsible for ourselves. I'm a libertarian in that way. You mess up, you screw up, you pay the penalty. I don't punish the masses. If I had a team guy on my special...
So there you go. Seems like a decent guy who believes in all of this rubbish, but that is the world Americans live in. But I'm gonna just try and take on point by point what he said. So I mean, one of the first things that, because he's, and I should mention that he's a libertarian as well. That's why I wanted to kind of discuss this. So one of the first points he kind of makes is, Reverend Al Sharpton and all of these kind of black community leaders, are outraged by the killing of a young black male. But where are they when there is all this black on black crime in the United States of America and the black on black killings, which is a deep tragedy? So what I want to say to that is it's a common excuse, a common way of deferring from the point to another, equal tragedy. So one of the first and most obvious things to mention about black on black crime is that it is not a crime that is being committed by somebody with as much power and resource as the state. So, yes, one black person may shoot another black person, but all in all, that is not as big a threat as the state coming after you and killing you. And secondly, when a black person kills a black person, if hopefully the individual is caught who was behind the homicide or murder, then they will be convicted and put in jail for life, or given the death penalty, right? So there are things in place already to deal with black on black crime, and they are sufficient to deal with black on black crime. And in fact, sometimes, given the corruption of how the state operates, even that is used against black people. So black on black crime, people getting wrongly convicted, for crimes that they didn't commit, and all of that kind of stuff. So black on black crime is sorted most of the time. The rate at which people catch the criminals responsible for black on black crime is about as high or on the level of the rate of that people are captured for white on white crime. What isn't being white on white crime is when police abuse their power against white or blacks, right? But they're mostly abusing it against blacks, or they're disproportionately so abusing it against blacks and minorities. Right? They are abusing it against the poor as well. And it's right to mention that, yes, poor whites are victim to this as well. Which is why, for you, it is so important to stop making excuses for them. Because they are the only ones who, for instance, in this case, will get a third-degree charge for sticking their knee and full weight of their body on someone's neck for a full 10 minutes. They're the only kind of person in the States, in America, that we know that would get a third-degree murder charge for being filmed while choking a guy to death with the full weight of their body, knee to the neck, and people begging them to stop. If that was a black guy, if that was a white guy, if that was anyone else doing that to another individual, apart from a police person, they would have been arrested straight away. There would be no excuses being made for them. They wouldn't get automatic, they wouldn't get automatic legal aid on behest of the state by the taxpayers' money. Get some of the best lawyers, right? Really, really good lawyers that the average defendant wouldn't be able to get, right? All of these advantages, they get to look at evidence in a different way and respond to witness accounts in a different way to the average defendant. So it's a huge difference the way black on black crime is treated in comparison with the way police brutality against any race, but especially against blacks, is treated, or against minorities is treated. So this use or equivocation between black on black crime and why people aren't responding to that in the community at the same level as they are responding to the way cops and occupying force are treating minorities is just ridiculous. So my point being that the state already has appropriate means to deal with black on black crime as far as we can take it, without dealing with the base of the problem, which is wealth inequality. And I mean, how do you feel that your tax money and the financial backing of police unions is out there actively mounting a defense for these 4 cops who killed this person, whereas let's look at the kids. I believe it was the kids that recently Ava DuVernay did a movie about, who couldn't afford. They didn't have unions for blacks, or any kind of economic remedy for blacks to be able to get adequate representation when accused of a crime. So police have a much, much bigger advantage. Not only in they've got a much more threatening way of being able to perpetrate such crimes, but they also have a better way of being able to get away with such crimes, which is why they are far more dangerous to the black community than even blacks are on each other. Yes, there might be more, but eventually either we can weed that out, or it's going to continue as a problem because of the wealth disparity between us, or between the black community and other communities. And then let's look at this historically. So when slaves and black people in this, from the emancipation of slavery all the way up to about the 70s and even up until now, but let's say up until about 60s or something, when they were being hanged and lynched and killed by law enforcement, back when there was the civil rights movement and an attempt to fight for the rights of us to vote, for us to things that Kennedy and eventually Lyndon Johnson was eventually the one who put through the civil rights bill that allowed us, that gave us the kind of voting rights. When all of that was happening and cops were killing us in excess, and murdering and beating and breaking down our marches, was it then? Uh, should we then have deferred to, well, what about black on black crime? Is it just not a terrible thing in and of itself that this is happening to minorities in your country? Does it not reflect terribly on a country that, eyes of the law, that this is happening in an overrepresented manner to minority individuals? This has been happening a long time before black on black crime. Right? So if you're saying the reason that, because this is the implication, that the reason that, cops are so harsh with blacks is because there's so much crime in the black community, and that therefore the black on black crime is a big reason why the cops are doing this to black people. But it was happening before in America. So that argument is completely invalidated, and the continuation, the through line has been from the 60s, from the beginnings of your American criminal justice system, right? In relation to minorities, there's always been brutality and beating and lynching and and shooting of minorities and cover-ups by the police in order to, the blue line where they all back up each other's culture of law enforcement. Because a lot of people, my dad's a police officer, I'm going to become a police officer. So this has been happening and passed down from generation to generation. So this goes before any kind of, this predates the masses of black on black crime, as you would suggest. So that's just an invalid argument. And just to say as well, and why do you always bring this up? Because no one ever talks about black on black crime on Fox News or any of these kind of media does something inexcusable and brutal to a minority person. That is the only time they care about this issue. And then they pretend that they care about it. And then ask black leaders, why are they not doing anything about it? When it's convenient for them to use that excuse. Because they don't do anything about it. Conservatives don't do anything about it because you don't actually care. That's the truth of it. And really what you're doing by this kind of deferral all the time, I'll give you two great examples. It's like talking about rape and blaming, saying, prostitutes and women who have who are very sexually free or sexually expressive, or wear sexually alluring attire, they're the people who are most often being raped. Right? They're the people who most often are victim to sexual raped so often, if they weren't prostitutes, or if they weren't women who have lots of sex or wear short skirts. It's their fault. That's what you're doing. That's essentially what you're doing. Or I'll give you another example, just to show this kind of deferring mentality of, let's shift view from brutality of cops abusing their power to blaming the victim for the crime against them. It doesn't matter if a woman is a prostitute, if she wears short skirts, whatever she does not give the right to people to rape them, to abuse them, to sexually harass them. It does not give you that right. In the same they are policing over also break the law. Or break the law themselves. They're supposed to be above that. They're not supposed to be breaking the law. And they are breaking the law and violating the civil rights of minorities. So I don't want to use, words that, but I feel like actually saying something quite aggressive towards this point, because it's such bullshit. And I think you know it. right? It's the same kind of mentality. You might argue to me, oh, because you're a libertarian, right? You might argue to me, well, welfare's really a big problem in inner cities because it doesn't give people the incentive to rise above their current circumstances, right? So why should I pay taxes? Why should I pay taxes to help out another person or another family? They should get themselves out of their problems, right? And I could just argue to you in response to that, well, and this has actually more relation than the black on black crime does to police brutality. But I could argue and shift the blame and say, well, what about governments bailing out corporations and banks and banks that give out bogus subprime loans? These banks that lost people their savings, their jobs, their houses, their pensions, and what they worked their whole life for, right? Where's the accountability there? Where's the outrage from conservatives and libertarians like you against these banks and corporations that are constantly bailed out by the government with our tax money, with the money that I pay? Where's the outrage there? But you wanna get angry, right? And you wanna make a big fuss when the state is trying to feed starving kids, which it doesn't do all that much. It gives much more bailout money than it does money to starving kids living underneath the poverty line who don't know where they're going to get their next meal, right? So there you go. Again, that's me shifting the argument. Because what you might say to me is, I don't support government bailouts, and actually I go against such policies, where there's irresponsible banking and irresponsible corporate behavior. I don't want them rewarded by the government with my tax money. Well, people in black communities are against black on black violence, and we do work with youths to try and quell that violence. Unfortunately, things like government cutbacks in youth centers and gang and addict outreach programs don't help much when we're trying to achieve that. Things conservatives and libertarians support, those cutbacks that stop us, that prevent us from reaching the amount of kids who complains half as much about the subprime loans that banks were giving, in the early 2000s, which they knew were complete garbage, right? And ended up tanking the economy because of it. Show me playing half as much about that as they do about welfare to blacks. Tell me when welfare to blacks has ever tanked your economy in that way. In any case, and I'll give you this: you are right. Welfare to the poor and minorities isn't going to lift them out of poverty. It won't. That's the truth of it. The only thing it does is stop them shifting into a space in which they will die in masses from suicide, from crime, from giving up on life, and just becoming completely anarchistic, nihilistic people who have no more any stock in society anymore. That's what would happen. That's what they'd become. Anyway, let's move on. Anyway, again, it's good. You're asking important questions. Here are my answers. So, one of the things that we're talking about here is the riots and why people are burning down the communities and all of this. And there is a lot of grey area in this. And I notice that a lot of the time you seem to be indicating this time it certainly was not blacks doing this. This was, from what I saw, a whole spectrum of different races probably suffering the consequences of COVID-19 and how that has really exposed the in the inability for capitalism, pure capitalism, or a market capitalism, neoliberalism, or a neoliberal market to really deal with the consequences of such a global catastrophe, because it is shown and exposed the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And I saw a lot of people of various races looting those stores. I saw white people, I saw black people, I saw people, throwing fireworks who were black, white, and everything in between. So again, that indication that it is blacks. And what about the known cops who were helping incite riots? There is an amendment in your constitution that gives you the right to use arms against your own government and the armed forces, right? When they become tyrannical. When is it okay to use that right? When would you say it's okay to use that right? Because as I see it, Boston Tea Party, give me liberty or give me death. A bunch of drunks and thugs, death by the sons, like the Sons of Liberty, a group of, thugs, or a gang of individuals who didn't want to accept the Tea Act, and they didn't want to accept that the British East India Company selling the American colonies Chinese tea without paying taxes on their part. They weren't willing to accept that imposition, and that led to a revolution against the British. Give me liberty or give me death, right? So again, the Constitution develops out of that. It's a big example that led to the development of your Constitution, which you say you can stand up against the kind of tyranny that was happening with the British government, and you can do that with arms, and you can do that with force, and you can do that with violence. It's part of your Constitution, an amendment in it. So that, I guess, when white people say it's okay, then the system you're lamenting, you can kind of overthrow. So anyway, the reason you're okay with this system, I mean, let's just imagine, let's say these people had have just targeted police stations. Would that have been okay for you? Because I think you would be saying the same things you're saying now. You'd be saying, who protect them, by and large, the good police that protect them, right? You'd be saying that. It doesn't matter where the goalpost moves, no matter what is being burned, whether it's small local businesses, whether it's big corporations who exploit their labor, whether it's a police station. No matter what it is, the goalpost would be moved. It wouldn't even matter if they went straight to the White House and burnt down the White House itself. You'd still be saying, no, they're burning down they're burning down America, they're burning down this. When are they allowed, if they feel that they are under attack, that the government is attacking them, their liberty, forced to express that? Again, I guess it's when white people say it's okay. And let's be honest, it's because it benefits you. You're not challenging it too hard because you know that it's of your benefit. And certainly libertarianism on the scale that you're discussing won't improve schools in poor neighborhoods. It will entice their kids there, hire private armed forces and build hospitals just to serve their own people. It will lead to entitled, uncaring people to flourish and encourage and empower individuals who lack empathy, blaming the poor entirely for their plight, no matter what their circumstances, whether their father, or some family member used to sexually assault or abuse them, and now they're on drugs. Oh, it's their fault. They shouldn't take drugs. Where's the empathy there? Where is the empathy there? You talk about empathy? Libertarianism is the least empathetic form of, any kind of system of governance that you can think of. So it is literally turning your nation even more unsympathetic and psychopathic. You're not solving anything. You're looking out and trying to secure your own privileges and trying to mask it and use the execution of an American on the streets, of a black American on the streets, whose children would suffer the most from the reforms you're suggesting. Schools. In the schools in inner cities. Their kids not getting food stamps won't improve their grades. It will force them to even harsher forms of survival. Drugs, murder, killing themselves. Everything you described would be 100-fold under a libertarian system. It only would benefit you and your type alone. And maybe not even you, because you ain't that wealthy, buddy. You might get dragged down like the rest of us. It is fueled by ego, greed, indifference, and narcissism, and you do not seem like somebody who is fueled by those things. I think this is something that you've been brought up with. You're an environment you've been surrounded with. And one that you need to reflect on more to see if it really, really does reflect the kind of man that you are. Because you are not a psychopath. You are not an egomaniac or a narcissist, or you wouldn't be on the video in such an emotional tone advocating for the irresponsibility of these officers. You care about people. The system you are advocating does not care about people. As I said, the next thing that you mentioned, black fathers not being around, you say. This is another big thing that conservatives, libertarians like to throw in black people's face. So let's go through a little bit of history here. So your government has twice, and this is fact, you can go back and look at it, twice flooded black ghettos with drugs and crack cocaine, all to destabilize civil rights movements. Right? So in those years, in the same years when crack was spread by the government to the children of America to sell, to smoke, and to die for, under the Reagan administration, some years later, they increased the prison sentences for those dealing or found with crack cocaine in comparison to cocaine, which ultimately meant whites were getting lighter sentences and blacks were getting fucked as per usual. These are facts. You flooded, or your governments, the white governments, flooded the streets with crack. And I guess that's not racism. I guess we just look at the individual, because don't look at the institution. Let's just look at Ronald Reagan himself. He was the one, or the people who did it before. J. Edgar Hoover. Right? They flooded these streets with with drugs. Their mission was to break down the social base of uplifting civil rights movements that were educating and uplifting the community. And it was working. It was working. And that's why you had a period of time where you saw, I think it was just around the 70s, 80s, where there were more blacks going to college. And then it sharply declined again after flooding these streets with drugs. Again, something, a little fact that libertarians and conservatives just like to kind of overlook and shift to the side as they blame the victims. So you did that to us. You did that to us, and you continue to advocate for a system that does that to us. Then later, your good cops are taught to lie, the good cops that you say 90% of them are good. Well, if 90% of them are taught to lie, stick up for each other, and manufacture evidence in many cases so as to strengthen the cases of your district attorneys, or sweeten the evidence. Are they good cops? And let me ask you something further. You're always talking about, this is another thing, everyone's always talking about 90% of cops are good, 90% of police are good. I believe that. I believe, 90% of cops are good. It doesn't mean they don't do bad things, because they're taught and trained to do those things, or turn a blind eye when bad things are happening, which makes them equally part of a defunct system, a problematic system. And yes, that's black cops included. We're not just talking, just because we talk about systemic racism, a black person can be part of a systemically racist system. In fact, we are. We often are part of the problem of the discrimination of our own race. So black cops, yes, absolutely, they can be, part of a systemically white a system that fueled by white supremacy and acting on behalf of white supremacy, which is really to say the consolidation of class privileges, and those class privileges just happen to be benefited mostly by whites, but other races as well, right? So yes, the consolidation of that power as the objective of a police force is something that is the responsibility is shared by individuals to make up that, because if they aren't bad and they aren't doing the manufacturing of evidence, aren't doing the torturing of suspects, the lies, the getting false false confessions, all of that kind of stuff that the bad cops generally do. If they're not doing that themselves, by turning a blind eye, they are bad cops as well. And one thing you don't say, and you don't mention, and you don't bother to bring up, is, well, let's just talk about blacks. Aren't 90% of blacks good? If not 99% of blacks good and law-abiding? I mean, wouldn't your country be complete and utter chaos if the entire, even if 50% of blacks were, criminals, your country would be complete chaos. It can't be possible. It's a very, very small minority. In fact, about the equivalent minority within whites who are also take part in criminal behavior. The fact is, the statistically, what most statistics show, studies have shown that the same amount of white people from ages 18 to 30 do recreational drugs and drink and do minor crimes, but they are not criminalized like blacks, put in prison and opportunities limited because of that behavior. That's the fact of it. Those statistics bear that out. But as many white people smoke pot, do cocaine, do all of those things as black people. They just don't get hassled about it as much. So minor crimes are committed almost ubiquitously, and it's a very, very high degree of people who do that. It's about, I don't know, over 50% at least, from the statistics I read, of people who do recreational drugs. Okay? So, again, these are the problems with the kind of argument you're establishing, right? And in many cases, in order, what we're in terms of are blacks and their interaction with the criminal justice system, right? You have police officers actually, in many cases, in order to sweeten evidence so the state's case is much, much stronger, right? Is almost airtight, right? They will manufacture evidence in those cases a lot of the time, And this isn't something that is picked out in the statistics that is a very, very overly high and overrepresenting black people in relationship to their interactions with the criminal justice system. Not only are they targeted more for actual patting down and whatever, but once they go through a certain length of once the cop thinks he's got his guy, he's got a guilty guy, the amount of people who are then forced into giving incredible who are forced into by the manufacturing of evidence, are forced into things like accepting plea deals, is a lot. And that then leads, and maybe sometimes the person is even guilty, but that doesn't matter if you can't prove their guilt. Better that 100 men go free than one innocent man go to jail. If you can't prove it, manufacturing evidence for it is just as bad. So then we've got a lot of blacks in prison who have had to accept plea deals or be convicted with sentences usually 13% longer than white defendants. They are afraid. I've seen blacks in America. They're afraid of white people. How do you feel about that? Actually, are terrified of white people. And they're afraid when they're caught up in the criminal justice system, and they have a useless defense lawyer who's incredibly underfunded and convinces them to take plea deals in order that they not have to face biased jurors who will certainly give them tougher sentences, and in order that they don't have to face the incredible amount of resources given to the state to convict these people. Where is the innocent until proven guilty in that, where the state has 10, 20 times the resources to prove someone's guilt than the defense has to prove their innocence? When they say it's the people versus, it is the wrong way round. The people, if we are to say innocent until proven guilty, it should be the defendant who is the people and the state that is individualized as the person who's bringing up the charges. It shouldn't be the people versus John Paul whatever, because that in a sense gives the privilege not to the defendant but to the prosecution. And that's the culture in which so many blacks now find themselves imprisoned. So yeah, so no doubt many. No doubt many in prison need to be there, but many are put there by a criminal justice system that needs a major overhaul and re-examination of the amount of state power used against the defendant, so as to see whether you truly are living up to that standard that everyone is innocent until proven guilty. Not just the likes of Jeffrey Epstein or should be afforded that privilege. And in the case of someone like Epstein, again, the privilege of wealth, the privilege of whiteness. And I don't like using the words white privilege, by the way, so just to tell you, but this is a good place. But in the case of Jeffrey Epstein, he gets an extra legal power, which is not just to be innocent until proven guilty. In the case of Epstein, this greater privilege affords him to be treated like an innocent person even when proven guilty. So before you speak about absentee fathers, why don't you check how they are created? This is your system, not ours. Sort it out. before you spew these ideologies of libertarianism, explaining how it's our fault, the victim's fault, that fathers weren't around or something like that, and that it's a culture that we ourselves are responsible for. Ask about your own prison system. How many people? I think it's 1 in 3. You've got the biggest, largest, you've got the largest population of blacks in prison in, I think, the largest amount. It's a disgrace. And a lot of them have taken plea deals when they shouldn't and didn't need to, because the state has so much power, and because they know they're going to be up against juries who are assuming guilt and expecting people to prove their innocence, unless, of course, the defendant. So, in the end, capitalism doesn't just not work for minorities in spite of its intentions. It's designed not to work for them. The game is rigged. You're just trying to make its desired outcome more effective. That's all libertarianism is trying to do. If the desired outcome is to disenfranchise minorities, then libertarianism would only make that outcome more successful, and so does conservatism. So whatever happened to the American dream? Whatever happened to it? George Floyd dying on the streets like he did. That is the American dream. You're looking at it. There was one thing that I want to say before I wrap up, and it's about Ahmaud Arbery. A young man who was shot while jogging by two, for want of a better word, redneck hicks, who had a shotgun and a pistol, and they stopped him, and they ended up asking him, questioning him for some crimes that they invented that were going on in their neighborhood, and that they wanted answers from him about, according to their story. And this goes to show, the reason I wanted to wrap up with this is just to show the level of privilege that certain people within the American community have. And I don't mean that strictly in the sense of kind of white privilege, because, to be honest, this kind of, I would call it American privilege, because this kind of privilege really isn't seen anywhere else in the rest of the world. It's a specifically American phenomena of a kind of idiot's privilege, the kind of privilege of Romans. I imagine Roman society, just before its crumbling, had people who were so spoilt by luxury that they had lost all sense of reasonable behavior and discourse, and just had become gluttonous messes. So one thing I keep hearing is that when these two gentlemen came up and stopped Arbery, when they came up and they stopped Ahmed, that he should have just, stood there while two men pointed guns at him and, answered their questions. And I want to say, I find that so wild that anyone can think this. And fortunately, the man on this video did not say this in this particular thing that I'm responding to, but I had to respond to it. Because in a country documented as having some of the wildest, weirdest serial killers in history, you're telling me, as a person, you would talk to two strange white guys who roll up on you with a shotgun and a pistol while you're jogging and say they want to talk in Georgia, a place where I'm sure they could easily build their own hideaway wild sex dungeon and dress up as their mothers and stick you in a hole while listening to wild horses, and as if you're in some strange Pulp Fiction movie. Nah, no one would do that. They'd either try and run or they would try and fight as this guy approached them. That is your only two options. Because you do not know. And I'm telling you, any black kid in America who gets stopped by two guys who are not police officers, who roll up with them with guns or weapons or just want to ask them questions, absolutely do not stop and answer their questions, because who knows who they are. And the only problem is that even if you say, oh, he fought back, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to run and get shot in the back? There is no good option in that sense. And again, police say minorities, blacks, are so violent, and that's what makes their job impossible. These two gentlemen who stopped Ahmed weren't actually cops, but this is the reason that they're so violent. That's why we have to be extra precautious, which is just ridiculous as a statement, as a blanket statement, because you're the person who was saying, and you mentioned blanket statements about blacks, but you don't want blanket statements made about police officers, strangely enough. But this blanket statement about blacks is ridiculous. But they're so highly violent and to make their job so impossible. But how come it is that medical staff and medical staff have a lot of interaction with people from the poorer neighborhoods, and social workers do, and none of them feel the need to have to carry around guns and just in case they need to shoot someone. I have never heard of a doctor or a teacher feeling the need that they have to have a gun on them so that they can shoot in self-defense against blacks who are attacking them. Blacks don't seem to attack their medical staff or social workers. It must be something maybe that the cops are doing that might explain this behavior. And that leads me to where I'm going to wrap this whole thing up. Because I want you to ask yourself the question. Any white person who watches this, or any white person who feels that these riots are uncalled for, which I agree that they shouldn't be happening, but I don't agree that they're uncalled for, and that there's no rationalizing why it's happening, and that the only excuse can be the greed of thugs. I mean, these are people risking their lives to do so. They know that there could be some guy in the shop ready to die, die and go down in flames as the proprietor of this business. So they know that there are these people who will be willing to shoot and kill them, and they're still out there looting. There is something more than greed going on, and I think you know it. So I want you to ask yourself this question: how and why what would it take? Because we all know, as I said, give me liberty or give me death. It's in your amendment. It's in your constitution. You're in the amendments that you have the rights to do certain things should your system become anarchic, should become tyrannical. So what would it take you to tear down your own neighborhood? Because there is something. What would it have taken? What kind of mindset must you have? Apart, if it's not greed, let's just assume it's not greed for a second. What kind of mindset? What kind of stake do you feel a person that burning down their own neighborhood doesn't really mean that much to them? That burning down their own police station the people who supposedly are there to protect them, doesn't mean that much to them. What kind of interactions must those people have on a daily basis with society? What must they hear about themselves as poor people and minorities to feel that disenfranchised and that alienated from the society they live in? What kind of experiences must they go through on a day-to-day basis to feel that way about society? And I think when you ask that question, and when you ask what level of that kind of alienation would it take for me to actually, you know, take part in such activities, to want to tear down my own society? What could have happened? Did my brother get shot by a policeman? Did they send my father to prison? Mother on drugs that your country actually first of all introduced into those neighborhoods, that the CIA, the FBI introduced into those neighborhoods? Is their mothers now on drugs? Are their schools just breeding grounds for or training to go to prison? Basically, teaching these kids that they are, prisoners in waiting. Does society tell them from the day that they are born that they are threats and that they are useless and that they will never make it out or be able to do anything good in their life? Are they unsure where they're going to get their next meal? Can they not get a job? If all of these things were things that were happening to you, things that had happened to you, things that were out of your control, would you be out there tearing down the neighborhood? Would you feel that your government has become so tyrannical that perhaps it is within your right to feel the need to disrupt it as much as you possibly can, as much as it is within the little power that you have? Would you be willing? And let me ask you this: would you be willing just to get an iPhone, to be shot with rubber bullets, to be hit with tear gas, to be potentially killed? Do you think in anyone's right mind that they would do that simply to steal a big screen TV? No. This is an inner rage that comes from the nature of their existence. And denying them that is only going to make these things worse. Come at it from empathy and understanding. Put yourself in the position of those who would do that. Some of them, I'm sure, are there for just because they're just nihilistic and have no stake in society anymore, and have got a little bit, greedy. But it ain't just because of greed or a desire for material things, which is what your society advocates as the highest good anyway. What your music and your TV and your adverts tell them are the good, are what make a person happiness, or make a person happy. And now they're trying to get their own because they couldn't afford it before. So in any case, your spiritual decline, your country is an embarrassment in race, in class, in education, in everything. And libertarianism is not going to sort that out. And you need to think to yourself, what will sort that out? Because the solution is there with you. Stop sticking up for your boys in blue. 90% of cops are not good because the whole culture is corrupt, in the sense that they stick up for each other, they don't tell on each other. If 90% of cops were good, how come every time there's a complaint by a civilian against a cop, they always come up with the same story, the same backup story that backs up their tampering with evidence, they're not treating crime scenes properly, they're lying, their abuse. If they were all so good, it's not. They're good people when they go in. They may even be good people when they meet you for lunch and go to your nephew's brisk or have a barbecue on the lawn with you. I'm sure they're great people then, lovely. But when they're on the streets, they are corrupted by the culture of the police force that you have created to protect you from people who are just Americans like you. You've been given a privilege and rights over them. It is not an equal system or equal treatment. And until that becomes manifest, and I'm sorry, libertarianism isn't going to do it, conservatism isn't going to do it, and capitalism isn't going to do it, you're going to see your streets burn, and it's going to be an embarrassment, because it ain't happening in any other countries. It's happening in your country, and it's a joke. All right, thanks very much.
Get up, get in the car, man. I will. Get up, get in the car. I've been waiting the whole time.
These days I sit back and stargaze. I'm a bastard, the last plague. Recession fear returns us back to a dark age and industrial waste space. Carcasses bask in acid raves, dancing on mass graves. In this hell, the finite can't stay. So till the last days, live forever at fast pace. The parties at Mark's place, drugs are everywhere and it shows on your scarred face. Like Scarface, raising the profit margin at the marketplace. Can't escape this fast maze. Like a guy who overdosed and passed away. Drugs are now spiritual like a raster's blaze. In the 60s we marched afraid against the racist jakes, charlatans and fakes at Camp Dave who wouldn't disarm the arms race. Our arms embraced, it was Armageddon, all in harm's way. Now in Y2K we're heading for Mars and space, the stars embrace. Ozone layer fucked to prepare for the tidal wave. Our lives today, kinda like the Matrix at standard, we're stranded in hyperspace. The revolution soon replaced with goons in tilted rooms doing shrooms and bass. Squat parties like a tomb or grave. My view is doomsday, pupils glaze, lucid dreaming in this purple haze.
I found these schools and gutters, I could have protected her. Arms reaching out like shadows, I should have shielded her. These gems beat like arrows, I rejected her. How she fiended needles, I fucking neglected.
Hey yo, it's modern times and I wonder if anyone feels the way I feel or deals with what I deal. The sadness, the ordeal, the elation, the surreal, the confusion, the mass appeal. High flying like man of steel or dancers in the dark. Guessing this life it won't last, cause like socialist states most these goals have no class. So do I reproach them or stroll past, focused on my own path to show heart with my chosen art, defying the times like Bonaparte or Rosa Parks or some old rock star who stole your hearts and brought a generation together of those who've grown apart by playing to the gods on the golden harp. As he strums his guitar strings our souls depart. But is this a dream world I'm living in as I succumb to society's violence, its vital sins. Violins play to the tragedy as tribal tyrants sing Bible hymns. Frightened, fighting with my rival minds within, singing in the mist and shadows, blissful in these twisted narrows. Sat in the park, pissed and parallel with more ghosts in my past than Christmas carols.
Schools and gutters, I could have protected her. Arms reaching out like shadows, I should have shielded her. These gems beat like arrows, I rejected her. How she fiended needles, I fucking neglected.
These are cocaine days and I'm okay dazed, and you ain't seen the stones I've blazed with bony braids who stay home more prone to be lazed in a hopeless malaise, in a coma for days, like being stoned in a crocus parade. But to cope with the pain, when these beautiful losers are at their lowest again, they get super fucked like Lois Lane. So insane and overdose, my flow is choked from comatose. On Prozac with no results, I go back to brain assaults with K. Of course the day is lost. Oh Lord, pray for us in this gospel of the apocalypse. God's gone, it's obvious. Kids go to colleges, return to broken promises. And it's cold in a future where sheep are cloned. Artificial intelligence, man-made souls. Deep on the street, stabbings over mobile phones. Road rage, bone breaks the souls of hombres. And ends careers like old age. Prophesizing I write on a stone page with snowflakes. And blow fakes off the top like toupees, I'm T-Pain. Jiggle my pocket for loose change in these shared flats of insanity. Locked in mundane maladies, 0-hour contract salaries. Lost touch in these manic scenes. A visual gallery, 300 friends on Facebook, none in reality. I said none in reality. Fuck it, none in reality. This music, it's just I want to do something beautiful before I die.
In his report, Officer Richter says he acted so quickly because King reached to the passenger side of the car. He says he didn't know if she had a weapon. He also said King showed what he called a, quote, uncooperative attitude and resisted by clutching her steering wheel, actions not caught on camera. King was charged with resisting arrest, a charge prosecutors immediately dismissed when they saw this video.
I was trying to figure out why is this happening to me. Oh my God. I was genuinely fearful for my life.